we're kind of burying the lead here. You shaved some major time off your recovery compared to what they expected, right?
I shaved about 6 months off my recovery.
Yeah, and that's the reason we're doing this. So I want to make sure that we're super clear, because you gave us the outline on how long it should take.
So
but
at 20 weeks, someone should be able to do a bodyweight squat.
Okay.
I leg pressed on Friday 5 plates for 20 to better depth than I had before surgery.
That's incredible.
And no pain.
That's incredible, dude. And that's the reason that we're talking about this right now. So, okay, supplement wise, what else are we looking at there?
So we had collagen, we had vitamin C. So collagen, obviously important for tendon health. Vitamin C is a cofactor in collagen synthesis. We had K2 and calcium for bone health. Curcumin was a huge one. So I did 2 grams of curcumin per day. Very powerful anti-inflammatory, are also very cardioprotective. I did Boswellia, which is something that I had never heard of before, but actually I dove into a lot of the recovery from tendon injuries and things like that. And Vigorous Steve had mentioned Boswellia as an anti-inflammatory that is tendon specific.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Think Big Bodybuilding Media. I'm Scott McNally, and today I am joined by Coach Paul Oneid. What's up, brother? How you been?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm very good and happy to have you here. This will be basically a topic that hopefully nobody has to ever deal with themselves. But the reality is, man, in bodybuilding, it's not a matter of if we get hurt. It's a matter of when we get hurt and what we do with that. I thought you've had an absolutely incredible story about your recovery. So we're going to talk a little bit about your injury. We're going to talk about the things that you've done to be able to pretty much super recover from this. And this, let me tell you guys too, this is the way that we learn in the sport. You know, we if something happens, we talk to other educated people like Paul, who's been around, he knows what he's doing. We figure out, well, what worked for him, and then we can build off that and apply those things into our own lives when they're necessary. So if you're tuning in because you've suffered an injury, we do wish you the best of luck. So Paul, first of all, before we get started, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's, to extend your platform to me is a very nice service, and hopefully we can add some value for people. So my background is in collegiate strength and conditioning. I did my undergrad in kinesiology here at the University of Ottawa, where I live in Ottawa, Canada. And then I moved to the US. I did a master's in exercise science at the University of South Florida and a master's of sports management at Robert Morris University, working at both University of South Florida and Robert Morris in a strength and conditioning capacity with their varsity teams. From there, I also worked at the University of Tampa and then got a full-time job at Queen's University up here in Canada as head strength and conditioning coach. From there, transitioned into the private sector, worked primarily in disability rehabilitation. So I do have quite a background in rehabilitation. And that's when I launched my online business, Master Athletic Performance, where myself and my wife own a coaching company with 5 additional coaches that work for us. I also have an education platform, Coaches Corner University, where we do continuing education for coaches and personal trainers, as well as business mentorship.
Hell yeah, man. And you've got a great business. Everything you're doing is like you not only are you a good coach, man, but I just have to say, as somebody who watches what you do, you also nail everything from the business side, the podcast, the content you guys put out, like everything is super slick, man.
Yeah, that means a lot. That means a lot. We put a lot of effort into living our mission statement, which is raising the bar for coaching. So we want to elevate what this industry can be and the value that we can add for the people that we're lucky enough to work with.
Hell yeah. All right. So I don't want to bring up any PTSD, but before we get into the recovery, let's talk a little bit about the injury. Tell us what happened.
For sure. So I competed in powerlifting at a very high level for 15 years. At one point in a 2015, 2016, I was in the top 10 all time in 2 different weight classes when it comes to the squat and the total. And I had taken a few years off the last couple of years, having dealt with some hip issues that limited my ability to train. And during that time is when I dove into bodybuilding. I did a show. And then in working with the coach that I was working with, Danny LaMartina, she got me pain-free. So I was like, okay, well, I'm pain-free. I'm 30 pounds heavier and leaner. Let's see how strong we can be. Turns out it was really strong. And I wanted to test it on the platform, give myself a little bit of a tune-up before I went into a meet in December, where the plan was to set the all-time Canadian squat record, which was actually only 7 kilos better than my best. I wanted to go out, that was going to be my last meet. I'm 37 years old. I'd be content going out on that.
Okay.
So I did a meet in Collingwood, Ontario, which is just west of Toronto. Did my first 2 squat attempts. They were kind of shaky. I could tell the rust was there. Decided to take a jump to 750. So my attempts were 660, which was like a 6 rep max, 725, which I've done for 5. And then I went up to 750, which is like a 2 to 3 rep max. I was like, okay, this is going to be cool. We're going to hit this squat. We're going to move on. As I descended into the bottom of the squat, I could feel my weight shift to my heels. So I was very much off balance. And then when I went to like push out of that bad position, it basically felt like 2 hammers hit the tops of my kneecaps.
Oof.
And my knees shot forward because my quads detached and the bar dumped behind me.
Good God.
So it was, I still haven't watched the video. I would love to supply that. I have the video. My wife has it. I don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to, I'm sure it's out in the abyss of the internet somewhere. I just don't care to see it.
I can't blame you, man. I mean, it is a life-altering experience for you, a life-altering injury. And to be clear, you said that is in plural, quads. You didn't just say quad, detached.
Yeah,
you said
yes.
quads.
So my actual injury is I had avulsion fractures on both of my patellas. So essentially the tops of my patellas fractured off and my quads detached from the top of the knee.
Oh, God.
So the surgery was go in, clean up the bone, and screw that tendon back to the top of the remaining patella, and then suture it up. The recovery, so we'll give the recovery timeline for what is quote unquote normal. So you have to wait for the bone to heal around the screw. That takes around 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, you are immobilized. So I was in a wheelchair for what was supposed to be 6 weeks. It ended up being 4 and a bit, 5 weeks.
Okay.
Then from there, during that period, you're adding 10 degrees of passive range of motion per week. So when you get out of the wheelchair, you have about 60 degrees of flexion passively. You continue to progress that passive range of motion as you're walking in a hinged brace locked out. So you're essentially like penguin walking with straight legs, and a walker for about 6 weeks. Then when you get full range of motion back, you can start to slowly unlock that brace and train isometrically, adding 10 degrees of motion, range of motion every week until that 20-week mark where you can start to load the tissue.
Okay.
That's a typical timeline that is evidence-based for Gen Pop populations.
Right.
I didn't really want to accept that. And one of the things that I did want to touch on in our podcast is the mental part of recovery.
Thank you for tuning in. And if we are providing value to you today, let me encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. We have several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week.
And so having dealt with many people dealing with injuries, different disabilities, things like that, one of the things that we can capitalize on from a mental perspective is control. We don't have much control when we're in a wheelchair. There's very little I can't do anything. At this point, I can't get the wheelchair into my bathroom, so I can't take a piss on a toilet. I have to pee in a jug, and I have a commode in the bedroom, so I just shift myself into a commode to go to the restroom and then back to bed. So my average step count for the month of July was 8.
Yeah.
So 8 steps a day, and that's pretty much to the commode and back. I was going to physiotherapy 3 times a week, which is something I could control. I was doing all the rehab that I possibly can, and we'll dive into that. At one point, there was 8 hours of my day was dedicated to rehab-related activities. My nutrition was perfect. My supplementation was perfect. My peptides and performance-enhancing stuff was perfect. And I took as much control over my situation as I could. To me, that alleviated a lot of the depressive symptoms that you might feel because you're working towards something.
Yeah.
And any man, I would say any man, but any person who's dealing with an injury and is fully reliant on someone else for their care, that's a really challenging position to be in. Like being a burden on your wife.
Oh, yeah.
that was heartbreaking for me to know that she had to take care of me. She had to take care of her work and herself as well, because my wife is an IFBB pro. So there's a ton that goes into her preparation as well, on top of taking care of me. And that was a big motivation. I was like, well, if she's going to do everything for me, I better be doing everything for myself. So if there's one lesson to be learned from injury, it's that you do have control over a lot of things. And diving into that is super important.
Yeah, I love that too, man, because I think that applies to all areas of life. Being in recovery for drugs and alcohol, that's one thing we look at is like, well, what are the things you can control? What are the things you can change versus what are the things that are out of your control? You can't control really the past. You can't control the future. But there are a lot of things that you do have control of right now. And if you can put your focus into those things, it kind of alleviates the stress of worrying about the future or, feeling bad about the past. So this is already clicking with me. I know what it's like to get hurt and instantly, man, a lot of times people just like shut off. They're like, oh, I'm done. You know what I mean? It's over. Diet goes. What did you do with your diet at that time? Let me ask you that.
For sure. So I kind of looked at each stage of the recovery in terms of what are the most important needs right now. And initially in recovery, it was I need to get my bone to heal as quickly as possible. And I need to supply the tissue with as much of the nutrients that it needs. And then the third was gut health, because the painkillers absolutely destroyed my GI tract. Like from Saturday afternoon to Thursday when they gave me an enema, I wasn't able to go to the bathroom.
Oh God.
Yeah. So it's like very uncomfortable. And then from then my digestion, bowel movements were very inconsistent. And I had worked with Dr. Dwayne Jackson in the past on some gut issues, and he was a tremendous help. So I'm one to reach out for help. Like if I need help with something, I will reach out to the people who I know can help me. So he was the first person I reached out to, and he essentially said, listen, return back to the diet we had you on. And then for myself, I knew, okay, if I need to heal the bone, I need to be supplementing with collagen, K2, calcium, vitamin C.
Okay.
So we added collagen, 30 grams a day, 15 grams twice a day. Added vitamin C up to 3 grams a day. Added K2, I think was 200 micrograms per day. Additional calcium with meal 1 and meal 4. I think I was only eating 4 meals a day because my appetite was trash. And then kept my protein at 1 gram per pound. And I ate enough. I wasn't able to weigh myself. So I kind of just went off my hunger cues and tried to standardize how much I was eating.
Okay.
And I was still tracking my nutrition every day. I wrote a meal plan for my wife to prepare for me, so there was no question marks. And you know what? Shout out to her. Like I had a morning drink every day for digestive health, which was like, glutamine, taurine, some lemon juice, some aloe vera, like stuff to help things move along. And every meal on the hour it was supposed to be there was there exactly how I wrote it down. So it was pretty cool. And then a lot of fermented foods. So with every meal, there was some sort of fermented food, whether it be Greek yogurt or kimchi or sauerkraut. And then a few digestive enzymes mixed in there as well. I didn't end up needing the digestive enzymes because everything was digesting really well. My digestion ended up being locked in. So that was the first 5 weeks until I got out of the wheelchair. And then I kind of kept that in, and I had to increase my food intake a little bit so when I got hurt, I was 252 pounds. By the time I got out of the wheelchair, I was 243.
Okay.
So 243, but very fat. Like I went from 252 with abs to 243 and looking like I didn't lift weights. And I mean, body dysmorphia is real.
Yeah.
So then from there, I kept the meal plan the exact same and just increased my portion sizes of carbohydrates because I was getting back to activity and getting back to training. And at that 12-week mark, when I had full function, so we'll talk about, my timeline for recovery, but at 12 weeks, I was pretty much training normally.
Huh.
That's when I was like, okay, I need to work on my body composition and get myself healthy again, because I didn't want to diet while I was still recovering, because I didn't want to limit my calorie intake for that recovery. But at that point I was like, hey, the tissues are healed.
Yeah.
And now we need to get, cardiovascularly healthy again, increasing my step count, increasing cardio, and getting back into like more normal training. So at 12 weeks, I had maintained at 243. And from 12 weeks to now, we're at 20 weeks today, actually. I'm down to like 227, 228.
Okay. And I want to keep traveling into like when you got back into training, when you were able to actually do any type of leg work. Since we are talking, you talked about the nutrition, let's hit the supplements next. You mentioned some of the supplements. Was there anything else that you've taken supplement wise? And I'm not even getting into like PEDs or peptides yet, but anything over the counter that you think was super beneficial to this process. And by the way, we're talking about you shaved like some major time off we're kind of burying the lead here. You shaved some major time off your recovery compared to what they expected, right?
I shaved about 6 months off my recovery.
Yeah, and that's the reason we're doing this. So I want to make sure that we're super clear because you gave us the outline on how long it should take.
So
but
at 20 weeks, someone should be able to do a bodyweight squat.
Okay.
I leg pressed on Friday 5 plates for 20 to better depth than I had before surgery.
That's incredible.
And no pain.
That's incredible, dude. And that's the reason that we're talking about this right now. So, okay, supplement wise, what else are we looking at there?
So we had collagen, we had vitamin C. So collagen, obviously important for tendon health. Vitamin C is a cofactor in collagen synthesis. We had K2 and calcium for bone health. Curcumin was a huge one. So I did 2 grams of curcumin per day. Very powerful anti-inflammatory, are also very cardioprotective. I did Boswellia, which is something that I had never heard of before, but I dove into a lot of the recovery from tendon injuries and things like that. And Vigorous Steve had mentioned Boswellia as an anti-inflammatory that is tendon specific.
Yeah.
So I added 3 grams of that per day, and then omega-3 supplementation. So I went up to 6,000 milligrams of EPA DHA per day, which is about 2 teaspoons of a high potency fish oil. So just 1 teaspoon in the morning, 1 teaspoon in the evening. Magnesium supplementation, I just do that before bed. I prefer the supplement I use is actually called Cinermag by ATP Labs because it has 3 types of magnesiums and you're getting about 600 milligrams of magnesium per cap. So I was doing 4 caps of that per day.
Is that something you had to work up to, or were you able to tolerate it just out the gate?
No, I'm a big magnesium guy. I've always supplemented with magnesium. I find it's just very calming, especially before bed to improve sleep quality. And that was a big challenge, like trying to sleep in knee braces and like with all the pain and stuff like that. It was super weird. I think I was sleeping in the knee braces for 8 weeks until I finally just took them off when I was sleeping. But then I would wake up and put them on to walk around because there's a lot of fear around recovery, right? So as much as I was aggressive with my recovery, there was still a lot of fear.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so we got over the counter. Yeah, that's pretty much sums it up.
All right. And then how about beyond that? Things like peptides or even anabolics. What did that look like and how did these things benefit you?
Yeah. So I do compete untested in powerlifting. So, when I got hurt, I was in a meet prep cycle. And when I came off, so I was in the hospital for 9 days. So I wasn't able to do anything for 9 days. And the reason we were in the hospital is we could do a whole podcast on that, but I didn't do anything. And when I got out of the hospital, I returned back to like a medical TRT, 100 milligrams a week, because super physiological dosages of testosterone are correlated with tendon injury. So I didn't want to take any of that. But any decrease in testosterone, you're impacting tendon recovery. So you want to find that happy medium where I was within physiological range. So I know for me, that's 125 milligrams a week, actually. And then I added 10 milligrams of Anavar because low dose Anavar is actually used in burn victims to help heal tissue. So it's like, okay, I can maximize this, not to mention, the anti-catabolic nature of Anavar as well. Sure. And then in the peptide side of things, I was using 500 micrograms of BPC 157 per knee per day.
Okay.
500 micrograms of TB500 per knee per day. And then 2 milligrams of GHK copper per knee per day. And then 4 IUs of growth hormone.
Okay. Okay.
So I didn't go crazy aggressive with anything like any fancy stuff.
Yeah.
The GHK was something that I'd never tried before.
Yeah, tell us about that, because the
really
TB and the BPC, those are things that we talk about a lot here, and I've heard some uses for this, but we haven't talked about it in any of the podcasts.
So GHK copper is actually used mostly in cosmetics for collagen synthesis, and from my understanding, it is 100% specific to collagen. So I was like, okay, let's give her a try. One thing I noticed, my scars healed so fast.
Oh yeah, your scars looked amazing, man. I have a ACL repair on my left knee. They took a piece of my patella tendon from the right knee. This was like 97, and my scar still looks worse to this day than your knees both look, man. Your legs look freaking great.
Yeah, my scars healed so fast. I used that for the first 10 weeks, and I kept the BPC and TB 500 in until about 2 weeks ago, so 18 weeks.
Okay, so you've just removed that now.
Yep.
All right, and you did. I want to note too. You did say that you put that like close to the site.
Yeah, so essentially, like wherever my scar was, I just traced the scar, which was kind of weird because I was talking to Dave Tate, and he's like, "Did you try injecting into your scar?" And I was like, "I did," and it actually just broke the pin. Ooh. So because the tissue is just so dense in there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been actively working on now is trying to release that scar, because the scar has to build up. You have to allow the scar to adhere to the tissue, because that's how it's going to heal. Yeah. But once it is healed, that scar gets sticky, so it can actually affect like the arthrokinematics of the joint, because the scar will stick to the bone, it'll stick to the muscle, stick to the fascia, and won't allow it to move. So I've been doing a ton of, I'll go in once a week to get some shockwave therapy. And then every day as I'm sitting, I'll like massage the scars when I'm sitting down, just kind of like pinch them around. And I'll do Theragun every day, trying to like break up the scars. And it's pretty much good now.
Okay. Yeah, that's wild. And that must be at least part of the reason, man, why you had such successful recovery with the scars.
I think so too. Yeah. But getting into the training after, which was your initial question, was like,
yeah,
I think what set me up for the training once I was out of the wheelchair was the things I was doing in the wheelchair. So I mentioned you have a lot of control over what you're doing. So one of the things that I asked my physiotherapist was like, what are the things actively that I can be doing every day? So he gave me a number of hip drills that I could do with straight legs, because it's important to get knee extension back. Because if you don't get knee extension back initially, like right from the onset of surgery, it pretty much adheres the joint capsule, and then you will not be able to get it after. It'll take you forever. So I would spend about 4 hours a day with my heels resting on a foam roller and my knees unsupported, so that just gravity would put me into an extended knee position.
Yeah.
So really focusing on extension. The next was, for anyone who's familiar with a PEMF machine, or a pulse electromagnetic field machine, this is the one that I had was called a Centurion Easy system, which is a ring, and I would put my legs in the ring, and I progressed up from about 30 minutes 3 times a day at 2 hertz to 4 hours a day at 30 hertz. And this machine creates a magnetic field like around your tissue, and amplifies the signals between cells. So when you say you cut your finger, the tissue knows to heal in certain directions because there is a magnetic field in your body, and that magnetic field sends signals between cells so that they can adhere together. This machine amplifies those signals, so it can actually increase the time of healing. Not to mention it upregulates ATP synthesis, so that tissue becomes more metabolically active. So I was using this machine 4 hours a day for the first 8 weeks that I had. So shout out to Matt Nickel, who works for the Ottawa Senators here. He lent it to me. Again, reaching out for help from those that will help me. I was also using a muscle stim machine. So I just had a Power Dot, which is a Bluetooth muscle stim that I had on hand from before. I was using that 3 to 4 times a day for 30 minutes to try and get my quad to turn back on.
Wow.
Because that, again, when you have an injury, there is a neurological inhibition to that area. So the sooner you can get the muscle to fire again, the better it's going to be able to come back. And initially, I'll tell you, I had to turn that machine. I don't actually know what the units of the machine correlate to in terms of frequency, but I had to turn the machine up to like 75, 85 on the machine to get my quad to do anything.
Really? It was just like resistant to turning back on, you're telling us. It just
wouldn't wake up. And then over time, I was able to reduce the amount of frequency I had to put through the quad because it would turn on much faster.
Okay.
So that to me was a key performance indicator that things were happening. And then I was able to flex my VMO. I was able to actively get into extension, and that was a big indicator for me that things were happening. So PEMF, extension, the straight leg hip drills, and then the third piece, which was a big thing, was blood flow restriction. So blood flow restriction, for anyone who's not familiar, it's occlusion training is another word that's used. It's very, very important because when your muscle is immobilized for more than 2 days, it loses all insulin sensitivity. So all those GLUT4 receptors that uptake carbohydrates translocate into the cell because there's no neurological stimulus because the neurological system is downregulated. And those GLUT4, there's no movement to stimulate glucose uptake. So what you can do with blood flow restriction is because the blood flow restriction lowers the oxygen constant, you can't get CO2 out of the muscle. So it creates this hypoxic state of almost pseudo exercise. So you're stimulating those GLUT4 receptors to upregulate so that the carbohydrates can be reuptaked into the muscle and you can prevent that atrophy. So I did that.
That's fascinating, man. So what did that look like doing blood flow restriction?
I just took some knee wraps. Tied them around my hip crease as tight as I could.
Okay.
And I would leave them on for 15 minutes at a time, a couple times a day.
Okay. So you weren't doing any type of actual exercise with it. You're literally just cutting the blood flow off there.
I will say I would do once a day, I would do my rehab exercises with the occlusion on, but I would also do it passively. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I kept that. I actually still do blood flow restriction stuff as part of my leg training now because it's profoundly effective.
Yeah.
And so those modalities during the period of inactivity were paramount. And then as soon as I got out of the wheelchair, it was essentially whatever movements that I could do pain-free.
Yeah.
I trained them to failure.
Okay.
So we're talking adductors, abductors. I was able to do, because I could stand, I could do RDLs, so a dumbbell RDL.
Yeah.
And then I started training my upper body again during the time I was in the wheelchair, I didn't go to the gym. I didn't want to be a burden. I also didn't feel like going to the gym. I just didn't want to be there. I didn't want to be in a wheelchair transferring in and out of machines. I didn't want to have someone load my plates. I didn't want to be a burden. So when I was able to drive, which as soon as I could get out of the wheelchair, I could drive because my knees could unlock enough. I drive a truck, so the seating position worked well.
Okay.
I started training to failure, and I picked movements that I could do without pain. The one movement I could do, actually, we'll call it loaded, was leg extensions because I could use the blood flow restriction and just my body weight. And train that with full range to failure. So I was doing that every other day. So I would do legs every other day.
Okay.
And that's when I started the isometric training because I did so much while I was in the wheelchair, my range of motion came back very quickly. By week 7, I had full 120 degrees range of motion.
And how long do they normally say that it should take?
12 weeks.
12 weeks. So you got that in 7 weeks.
Yeah, I got that in 7.
All right.
And then essentially what you do is once you can get passively to 120 degrees, you start loading isometrics starting at 30 degrees, and then you increase by 10 degrees, quote unquote, every week. But what I did is I trained those isometrics every single day. So I would go into the gym, I would do my isometric training on the leg curl, like seated leg curl, laying leg curl, leg extension, and leg press.
Okay.
So for the leg press, I would set the leg press on the safeties at the top, and I would move my foot position based on how much flexion I was able to get. And I had the braces that I had a locking hinge, so I could lock them at certain degrees of range of motion.
So it wouldn't go any further. Okay,
Yep.
interesting.
So just load the leg press with a couple plates, and then just push against that empty sled with like 3 out of 10 pressure, just so that it wouldn't move, and I could feel my quad engage.
Yeah.
And I would do that for 2 sets of 1 minute.
Wow.
And initially, you're shaking like crazy. The neurological system doesn't know what to do.
I bet.
But every time I was able to do it without shaking, I would drop 10 degrees.
Huh. Okay.
So then I was able to progress by 10 degrees every 3 to 4 days.
Okay. Wow.
Then I got back to 120 degrees of isometrics, and then it was back to the top, loaded.
Okay.
And for that, I actually used the same weights that I was using for the isometrics. So like the leg press was 2 plates. I would just do sets of 20 within the range that I was allowed.
Yeah.
And then I progressed the range as I was able to access it pain-free. And what I found to be really cool was I was able to progress really quickly because the isometric strength was there. And as soon as I was able to get down to full range of motion on the leg press, I was able to start doing some single leg stuff. I still kept in the training to failure with the leg curls, because leg curls didn't hurt me in full range, because I wasn't activating that quad. Training leg curls to failure, seated and sitting. I was able to leg press with some range of motion and just progress that range of motion down. And the way that I did that, actually, I would set the safety, like the bump stop on the leg press, and then put a yoga block on top.
Okay. Yeah.
So I could touch the yoga block every rep. And then I would rotate the yoga block sideways. And then I would lower the peg and then switch the yoga block. So I was able to progress that range of motion every couple of days all the way down. And because I did all that hip work, because I did all the isometrics, it actually pretty much fixed all the hip issues that I had before. And my range of motion now is significantly better than it was pre-surgery, which is pretty cool.
No kidding, man. That is wild. And you're back to training now, like full course. Like you can lift as usual. Like you're loading leg exercises. And are you at this point, do you see, like, is the muscle coming back rapidly, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, like my quads came back relatively quickly, and now it's just a matter of getting stronger and getting that muscle bulk back. It'll just take some time. You know, I mentioned I leg pressed 5 plates for 20. And I'm doing a few things, actually, I should mention. I do whatever I can do to standardize the ranges of motion I'm using.
Okay.
So with that leg press, I'll keep the bump stop at the edge of my active range of motion so that I can lightly touch it and come back up, so that I'm not cutting my range of motion for the sake of loading.
Okay.
And then I kind of set myself parameters of, okay, once I can do 20 reps with the load, then I'll increase. And then start back at 15. And I'm trying to train to failure as much as I can with these movements. So it's still like top set, down set. Like right now, I did my top set 5 plates for 20 with the bump stop lightly touching. Then I lowered it to 3.5, took the bump stop off, and did a 3-second isometric hold in that stretch position, trying to get my resilience back, get the fear gone.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hit that for, I think, 21. So next week I got to increase the load.
Okay.
There is a lot of fear still around, like, getting a pump in my quads still feels really scary.
Oh, I could imagine. And I've seen that, man. I've worked with so many people that maybe it wasn't even a bad injury, but like they maybe popped some fibers in their pec, you know, and had to take a few weeks off of chest training. And then from there, there's that fear of, is it going to happen again, you know?
Taking time off of training is something that I think is way too much utilized. So if we think about just the injury itself. So if you have a muscle belly tear of your pec, or, you know, I tore muscle belly tears both my lateral quads, you know, the tendency is, okay, I want to reduce training volume. But when we look at what is actually going to heal tissues, it's a stimulus. So we need to provide a stimulus that is safe and that is effective for the goal. And the goal is collagen synthesis. So we need to put tension through tissues. And the best way to do that, to heal tissue, is isometrics.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Isometric holds will upregulate collagen synthesis a lot more than traditional like loading through ranges. So if you pop that pec or you pop your quad or whatever,
Right.
find that range where you don't have pain. So you get into as much of a stretch as you can, even if we're talking about abduction of the shoulder, even if it's 30 degrees of abduction before it's too much of a stretch.
Yeah.
Do isometric holds within that range. And what you'll find is do them daily, and every couple of days you'll be able to increase that range. You'll get your active range back a lot faster. Then you can load through those tissues.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, man. That does.
Yeah, I think the other piece here that was really eye-opening for me when it comes to training is how underutilized isometrics are, especially in those stretch positions. If you're getting into that stretch and exploding out of that stretch every rep, yes, you're going to have a higher rate of force development. You're going to have higher tension through the tissues, quote unquote. But we miss out a lot on kinesthetic awareness. Like, where is our body in space? We miss out a lot on the motor learning aspect of recruiting those muscles and actually squeezing out of the bottom with the muscle, with the target muscle that we're trying to train. So by using isometrics and slowing down our tempo, we're going to improve the mind-muscle connection here and actually get better at recruiting the muscle we're trying to train. So the strategy that I like to use is I'll do a heavy top set, obviously great control, great range of motion, but I'm going to try and load that top set as much as I can within the rep range that I'm trying to train. Then my back off set, I'll use some sort of tempo or some sort of isometric or some sort of combination of the two to actually work the positions and the target muscle that I'm trying to train. So the leg press, for example, I do that heavy top set with the bump stop. I take the bump stop away and I'm working probably a little bit lower in the range of motion that I had with the bump stop with that slow tempo, that isometric hold. And then when I'm pushing out of the bottom, I'm just squeezing through my quads.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, man. And I could imagine how beneficial that would be. I never thought about how beneficial an isometric could be while dealing with a muscle injury recovery.
It's profound. Like the isometrics were a huge part of my recovery. And then the blood flow restriction training as well. For anyone who's never tried it, it's extremely uncomfortable. Like to do it properly, because the research is centered around an 80% occlusion. So I actually got some BFR cuffs from a company called Vault. Luckily enough, reached out for help from a friend of mine who's actually the Canadian sales representative or sales manager for Vault. And they have Bluetooth blood pressure cuffs that will do a calibration to your blood pressure. And then you can standardize an 80% occlusion.
Oh, wow.
Based on your own personal physiology. So I knew that anytime I did occlusion training, it was standardized, that same occlusion every time I came in the gym.
That's wild. What do those cuffs run for retail?
Those are about $650 Canadian. So
do you get two of them for that price? Or
you actually get four.
Okay.
You get two arm and two leg.
Okay.
The problem, I will caveat, is now that my quads are coming back, the cuffs are actually a little too small.
That's a good problem, right?
Yeah, it's a good problem. The blood flow restriction works a number of ways. So I mentioned earlier, it'll help with glucose uptake. It'll help with creating that pseudo exercise environment. The other thing that it does is, because the discomfort of the lactic acid buildup supersedes the joint pain that you will have in end ranges. So you're actually able to get deeper into your end range stretch with a blood flow restriction than you would otherwise. So when I started having that full range 120 degrees, I got on a bike and I would ride the bike with my blood flow restriction cuffs on. 5 minutes on, 3 minutes off for 2 to 3 sets, because that allowed me to be in that deep knee flexed position under load more time. And the more time you can spend in a range, the more you'll be able to keep that range of motion as you progress with your recovery.
Okay.
So even in leg extensions, I did it a little bit on the leg press. I did it a little bit. Now that I'm doing lunges again, I'm wearing the blood flow restriction on walking lunges, just to get into those deep end range positions with less pain. Then you add on the fact that training with blood flow restriction allows you to reach failure with much lighter weights.
Yeah.
you're getting a hypertrophy stimulus without that joint strain.
That makes sense.
I actually discovered a couple weeks ago at Swiss when I was talking to Dr. Mario Novo, I was worried that I might be limiting my tendon recovery by training with BFR, because it was my understanding that to heal a tendon, I needed tension. And if I'm not using load, I'm not going to be getting that tension. But what he explained to me is, because tendons are actually quite inert tissues, in that all that really changes is the amount of collagen in them and the amount of hydration and hydraulic strength that they have. The BFR actually helps that.
No kidding.
So you're not limiting tendon recovery, which I thought was fantastic. And I was like, well, I guess I don't need to change anything.
Yeah.
So I still do blood flow restriction for mainly extensions. I do some loaded stretching with the blood flow restriction. I haven't done the bike as much because my range of motion is fine, so I haven't had the need to do it. You're also getting better mitochondrial biogenesis, so you're creating more mitochondria because the more need for oxygen, the more need for mitochondria.
That makes sense.
The other cool thing is my legs are vascular as fuck because I did so much BFR. I've got veins running across my shins I've never had before.
Really? No kidding.
My kneecaps are all like veins running all along them. Well, you got the BFR, which is increasing vascularization, because your body will create blood vessels to accommodate for lower oxygen. Then all the peptides, the TBC, the BPC, the TB, the GHK, they all increase vascularization of the tissue. Yeah. Growth hormone will increase vascularization of the tissue.
Of course.
TRT will increase vascularization. So I'm walking around, even though my legs aren't big anymore, they're still veiny as fuck.
Just
so they look
covered in veins. Yeah. That's wild, man. I got to get Mario back on here. We did something about BFR, and it was probably about 4 years ago now. So I was telling him I want to get him on to do an updated segment on it. And one of the big reasons too is because 4 years ago the technology wasn't as good as it is now. Like back then, he was suggesting these cuffs were going to be like at least a couple grand, you know. And he mentioned those to me as well. That I love that idea, man. These things are calibrated through Bluetooth to your blood pressure. I mean, $600, that's an investment. 600 Canadian, so maybe it's like 500 US. That's an investment, but man, the benefits that you could get out of it. And there's reasons for me that I could definitely get along with some BFR myself.
I use it every leg training session. My wife, IFBB Wellness Pro, she's using it 2 or 3 times a week, depending on, what muscle group she's training. I'd love to give some protocols to people in terms of BFR that I really enjoyed. So if you're dealing with any knee pain, the beauty of the BFR is that decrease in pain, and it lasts for quite a bit of time. So if you're having issues getting those quads to open up or getting your hip flexors to open up because your knees are so inflamed, hitting some bike with the BFR before you do your pre-workout mobility, fantastic way. If you're looking for, say you're going to go do like pendulum as your first movement of the day and you want to underload your pendulum because you're getting really strong, hit some leg extensions with BFR. The typical protocol for a blood flow restriction is you're using around 30% of your 1 rep max, which no one knows their 1 rep max leg extension. So pick a weight that's really hard, where 30 reps, you're reaching failure almost. So if you're about 1 to 2 RAR at 30 reps, you do 30 reps, rest 30 seconds, 15 reps, rest 30 seconds, 15 reps, rest 30 seconds, then 15 reps again. So 4 rounds. What I prefer to do is in those 30 seconds rest, I'll actually do a loaded stretch. So if I'm doing a leg extension, I'll do my 30 leg extensions, and then I'll get on the floor and kneel down trying to touch my butt to my heels. Yeah. Hang out for 30 seconds, then right back to the leg extension.
Okay.
It's very painful, like in terms of discomfort in the muscle, but your knees feel amazing. And then when you get to that pendulum or that leg press or that hack squat, you're pre-fatigued, so you're not going to be able to lift as much. And that quad and that knee are going to feel amazing, so you're going to be able to get deeper into that range of motion, get a better stretch on that muscle, and you get a better hypertrophy stimulus with lighter weights.
Incredible.
So I've used that way, and then I tend to finish my workout was something that's going to really stretch out the tissue so that I leave the gym feeling a little bit opened up. So one of my favorite ones that I've been doing is I'll do a heel floating leg press with bands. So I'll use either a Cybex squat press or something similar to that. Put the toes as low as possible on the platform so that the heels are off.
Okay.
Get a ton of knee flexion on the way down. And I'll do sets of 15 to 20 with 10 walking lunges per side, then the 30-second stretch. And I'll do 3 rounds of that. The entire set takes about 8 minutes with the blood flow restriction on. You leave the gym with the nastiest pump.
Yeah,
You've trained to failure. You've accessed stretched ranges of motion that you're going to keep after the training session. And then because when you take them off, you get an increased blood flow to the muscle, I've found that it's decreased my DOMS, my delayed onset muscle soreness, so that I can train legs more frequently.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that, man.
Yeah. So that's been pretty cool. Pretty cool to experiment with that. And I mean, I talked to Mario after he spoke at Swiss. You know, I reached out to him and I was like, hey man, like I loved your presentation. I learned a ton. I used BFR in my recovery. And he's like, well, recovery from what? I'm like, oh, I tore both my quads. And he looked at me. He's like, you're not limping. I was like, no, I just trained legs yesterday. He's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you trained legs? And I told him what I did. And he's like, we got to sit down and talk. Because, you know, as I mentioned with this recovery timeline, I went into this with quads that could squat 800. No one in the research has that, number one, neurological adaptation. No one has that muscle bulk going into these surgeries. So they have no data on us.
Yeah.
And there are a few things that you can't compromise on. Yes, I used PEMF, and yes, I used muscle stim, and yes, I used peptides, and yes, I used Anavar, but the bone has to heal. So you can't get around the bone.
Yeah.
Could I have gotten out of my wheelchair faster? Probably, but I didn't go to get x-rays to check.
Right.
It was just, you know, you're going to be in the wheelchair for this amount of time. It ended up being like a few days short of, it was about 5 weeks. So at 5 weeks, I got out of the wheelchair and I was walking with straight legs. At that point, it's like, cool, you're walking with straight legs, but you're still uncomfortable. Your hips feel weird. I had a lot of low back pain because I was in a bed for 5 weeks.
Of course.
So there's certain things that you can't really compromise on timeline, which the first 5 to 6 weeks was that. From there, I had an agreement with my physiotherapist that I wouldn't exceed functional benchmarks. So as opposed to being like, you can't do more than 10 degrees for 7 days, it was, you can't do more than 10 degrees until you can perform your isometric without shaking.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a functional benchmark as opposed to a timeline benchmark.
Yeah.
And I was very strict to those. I didn't compromise on that because I had a great relationship. So my surgery was in Collingwood, which is 7 hours from where I live. I had my care transferred to a surgeon here in Ottawa named Dave Simon, who did my knee surgery in 2015. I had a meniscus scope.
Okay.
And he gave me a huge solid. He gave me $1,000 credit for physiotherapy because I don't have insurance.
Oh.
And for those of you in the U.S., not everything in Canada is free.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. If I wanted to wait for free physiotherapy, they didn't actually call me for 12 weeks.
Wow.
So there was a 6-week period where I was going to physiotherapy 3 times a week where I wouldn't have been able to access that if I didn't have my own resources.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wanted to be really true to Dave and not take advantage of his generosity. So I worked with my physiotherapist. I said, I'm cool with this as long as we're okay with functional benchmarks because I know I'm not normal and I know that none of the research is on people who've taken peptides and who are doing PEMF and who are as adherent with nutrition and rehab as I am.
Right.
So we went off functional benchmarks. And we're sitting here at 20 weeks. Like I said, we should be doing body weight squats tomorrow. You know, I pendulum squatted a plate for 15 reps. You know, no pain. I haven't had knee pain after training legs in probably 4 or 5 weeks. And I say pain, when you're recovering and when you're rehabbing, it fucking hurts. Okay, like it hurts. But you need to have indicators that tell you whether you're pushing too hard or not. And for me, it was, did my baseline level of inflammation return the next day?
Okay. Yeah.
So as long as my inflammation didn't get worse from day 1 to day 2, and as long as my range of motion didn't get worse from day 1 to day 2. Because if you do overdo it and you do have an increase in inflammation or an increase in inflammatory markers, your central nervous system will tighten up and it will restrict your range to protect you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You want it to. But if you dose it appropriately, you should be able to continue to make linear progressions without setting yourself back, as long as you listen to those things and you don't push them too far.
All right, Paul. Well, this is incredible, man. And like I said, your story is absolutely incredible. Just the tenacity that you've had to be able to work through this. I mean, physical therapy basically for 8 hours a day, treating it like a full-time job. I mean, I can only imagine, and I know that you had people that helped you, but I can only imagine like the financial investment that you've put into this, the time that you've put into this. But, it's great to see the reward that you've gotten, the benefit you've gotten out the other side, man. Yeah,
I will say, I'm so fortunate to be in the position that I'm in. We work fully remote, so I didn't lose any income.
Yeah,
I had a little desk that I would slide on top of my hospital bed, and I would work on my laptop. I would do my Zoom calls. I actually started recording podcasts while I was in the hospital bed.
You're kidding? That's wild.
There's a few podcasts on our channel that are me in the hospital bed.
Yeah.
I have a phenomenal wife who's like an absolute rock star in helping me out. I have so many people from, I mentioned Daniela Martina. A lot of the stuff that I've implemented is because of what she's taught me. Even Dr. Marv, who you had on the podcast a couple of days ago, he helped me.
Yeah, I didn't know you knew him.
BFR stuff. Yeah, so he actually reached out with some of the BFR protocols that I kind of adapted for myself. I had Matt Nickel, who's the performance coordinator for the Ottawa Senators, is a friend of mine. Ken Kanakin, who's the head of Swiss. Justin Kavanaugh helped me out a lot as well. Dylan Seeley. It's so many people that I feel so grateful to have their support and be able to, pick up the phone and ask for help.
Yeah, that is pretty cool, man. Hey, if people wanted to follow along, you mentioned your podcast. I know you put a lot of content out. Where can they follow along with everything you're doing?
Sure. So my podcast is called the Coach's Corner University Podcast. It's a selfish endeavor where I pick very cool people in the industry just to sit down with them for an hour and find out, what makes them special and what their expertise is in the realm of health, fitness, and coaching. You can find that at coachescorneru.com or the Coach's Corner University Podcast on any podcast platform. You can find me at Paul Oneid on Instagram. And our coaching company is www.masterathletic.com.
All right, awesome. I'll be sure to have all that stuff below too. You guys can go down to the description and click the links away. And Paul, I appreciate you taking the time, man, to come on and share your story and share your insight and really share hope, because I think that, as I kind of mentioned toward the beginning of the show, that I think a lot of times when we get injured, it deflates us, and we do feel helpless. We feel like that this is it definitely changes things, and it's not what we wanted to happen. I've seen it literally end people's, interest in fitness and bodybuilding in general. Like they give it up, man. And if you love it enough, you can find a way through, and you are absolute proof of that,
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And actually, while we're on the subject, if anyone is interested in Coach's Corner University, we have 200 hours of continuing education lectures on the website, and it's a one-time fee of $350. But if you use the code podcast300, we give you $300 off. So if you want to take advantage of that, you go ahead. And thank you so much, Scott, for the opportunity to share and extend your platform to me.
Absolutely, man. It's good to have you here. And guys, listen, if you have any questions for Paul, you want to post them up here. We do some type of a circle back down the road. Maybe bring up another topic. I'd love to have you back on the show, talk about something else.
I would love that. That'd be amazing. Thank you.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Of course, if you haven't, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. We appreciate having everybody here, and I'll look forward to all your comments.
Thank you for tuning in, and if we are providing value to you today, let me encourage you to subscribe and hit the bell. We have several bodybuilding podcasts that come out each week.